So this is actually going to be the first of two kind of shorter videos on Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement. Now, this video is predominantly going to focus on how it got started, all right, how they were able, the English, to finance it, and what some of the earliest actions were. The next one will focus on the struggles that the English faced in setting it up and how they overcame them. So to begin with, we address where the money for these colonies came from, because we're going to get to a point where expeditions across the Atlantic and setting up colonies are going to be too expensive for individual nations to attempt by themselves. Enter the joint stock company. Now, the best way to think about a joint stock company is somewhat like what we might now call a quote unquote corporation. So think of these as corporations. Now, initially, threats from Italian competitors in the wool market. So if you think back to the enclosure movement, raising sheep, harvesting wool, and selling it, you have Italians and British merchants who are competing in that market. This is going to lead to the joint stock companies, these private companies to finance expeditions. Now, a simplified way of thinking about this would be different investors, large groups of people are pooling their money together. So instead of one person saying, I'm going to start a business with $100, you could have 10 people saying, here's $10, and then you have $100. Or you could have 10 people say, hey, we're each going to chip in $100, and now you have $1,000, just as one example. But if you have more people tossing their money in the hat, tossing it in the pot, then you have more of a financial backing for these expeditions, for these voyages, and for these colonies. Now, here we see one of the main sticking points. Why were these companies seen as attractive? Limited liability. You might see LLC on the name of businesses today. The LL is limited liability. Anytime you invest, you might hear about investing from other people. Maybe it might be in the stock market or a retirement fund or real estate. Anytime you invest, there is risk. There's some investments that are low risk. Technically, if you have a savings account at a bank, it's low risk because you're really not going to lose your money. You're also not going to make much money. All right, so money can build with what we call interest, return on your investment. You're not going to make much money. That's why savings account is low risk. Investing in the stock market is high risk because you could lose everything or you could double or triple your money. And if you have more people pooling their funds together in a joint stock company, there is less risk. Because if the company or the business fails, all you lose is the money that you put in. You lose your initial investment. You're not responsible for all the debts of a company. That risk is spread out. And because of its setup, even if the primary owner or the founder dies, the company can continue. So again, this is a way to get more money, more capital. Capital is another phrase for money, to set up colonies and thereby maximize profit. So how did these first colonies get going? From different joint stock companies. Now, in the sense of permanent settlement, VA. VA is short for Virginia Company. The Virginia Company was a joint stock company. King James I, that same person who wasn't really all that fond of the Puritans, the individual who called them evil and you better shape up or ship out, more or less. When there was the realization that North America, even the Western Hemisphere, it wasn't just a big island, it was a new landmass. These lands are claimed for the different kings of Europe. So North America was said to belong to the English king. In this case, it's James the First. So if you wanted to set up a colony, you needed a charter. You needed permission, a piece of paper with the king's seal that said, yes, you are allowed to set up a colony on my land. The king considered it their land, belonging to them. Now, there was a charter granted at this time because about 2 years earlier, England had signed a peace treaty with Spain. So the two sides have been at odds for decades. There's a peace treaty. So now all of a sudden, all of that time and all of that capital or all of that money that had been invested in war, it can shift over to colonization. There's also a large class of sailors who had previously been employed attacking the Spanish. Those sailors have experience, and that experience can be used for the purpose of manning ships for colonization. Now, this Virginia company eventually was broken up into two what we call subsidiaries. All right, two branches of the main company. You've got the London Company and the Plymouth Company. The London Company is the one that funds the Jamestown expedition, and the Plymouth colony, well, that'll be Plymouth, and we'll get to that later. But if you've ever seen Pocahontas, which we'll obviously dive into the inaccuracies there, but the very first song is all about, they mentioned the Virginia Company. For glory, God, and gold, and the Virginia Company. So even though it's technically the London Company, that part was somewhat correct. Now, 1607 is often viewed as, in American history, a big date, so to speak. Truthfully, we don't get too much into exact dates. There's just some that I present so that you have a greater understanding of why there's a big deal made of them. 1607, 3 ships with 144 men set out from England to go to North America. And they'll found what's called Jamestown. Now, 104 survived, which means 40 of them died en route. Of the 104 that survived, only 38 of them were alive 9 months later. I'll just say that again. 104 survived the journey across the Atlantic. 38 of them were still alive 9 months later. I simply say that to demonstrate how difficult setting this up will be. Remember, in the next video, you'll see more of the struggles, but it's incredible what the English death rate was in those early years. Now, they settled more inland. They weren't necessarily directly on the coast, but they settled a bit further inland on a river that they called the James River, and they came up with a settlement they called Jamestown to flatter the king. In the charter, we can see here that there were 2 goals. All right, there was kind of a dual mission, we would say. The first is to gain profit. They're here to get money. That's why in the Disney cartoon Pocahontas, there's an entire song about digging for gold. Dig, 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 however it goes. They were inspired by tales of Spanish gold found in Central and South America. And since this is a part of the same landmass, their reasoning tells them it must be here as well. This was another goal. It was stated that they wanted to propagate the English or the Christian religion, in this case, the Church of England, English religion. Propagate means spread. So here again, we see economic and religious motives are going hand in hand. Now, in addition to being a bit further inland, they do choose their location for defensive purposes. I mean, the image here, the artist's conceptualization, a triangular stockade, firing post on each corner. When you set up in a swampy, forest-covered, disease-ridden location, that's not going to spell victory for early settlers. You know, there were less than 24 buildings in this area to begin with, but ultimately they did achieve their primary objective of safety from the Spanish. So again, they were able to finance this colony through the joint stock company. But as you know, you're going to see, yes, it was safe from the Spanish, but ultimately more challenges